you have heard the story, I have heard the story, and whole words have heard the story about how bad Israel is to the Palestinian people. And genocide is the word that they use. How do you react when you hear these things?
I find that challenging. I don't think it's a fair reporting of what is simply a really unpleasant war in Gaza. Yes, civilians have died, but civilians always die in war. Unfortunately, that's one of the very tragic features of war, and it's why war shouldn't be started. And we have law of armed conflict to make sure we minimise this stuff. I'm fortunate enough to have been exposed to a number of Israeli units. I've been into Gaza twice during the war. I've seen it firsthand, and I know they're following the law of armed conflict. That doesn't mean civilians don't get killed, but unfortunately, this is a byproduct of war, and Israel is doing everything it can to minimise that, whilst Hamas is doing everything they can to try and maximise civilian deaths.
But why is the West listening to Hamas and not Israel? What kind of benefit do they have when they listen to Hamas' story?
Well, I think it's a real challenge that Israel in many ways has created by not allowing any journalists into Gaza. I can see why. I can understand why they made that decision, but what it means is the only information that comes out of Gaza is from journalists affiliated to Hamas.
Okay.
So Hamas gets to run the news because they're the only source of information about this conflict.
Yeah, but that means it's just Hamas that has the benefit. Why are the world listening to them then? They understand. They have to understand that they are not polite.
Well, I think it's a major news story. You know, this is a story that the readers of news want to read or hear about.
Okay.
And so the news stations feel that they must run the story, but the only story they have is the one that Hamas is telling. Israel has done a truly poor job of explaining this war to the world. I think after 7th of October, Israel assumed they would get world support because 7th of October was so horrifying. I don't think October the 7th, how bad it was, is truly properly understood by the West. I don't think people realise just how horrifying some of the things Hamas did was. And as a result, when people in Gaza are sharing videos of airstrikes and dead children, it becomes very easy to turn against Israel because, of course, those things are horrifying. But it still doesn't mean it's anything more than just a very unpleasant war.
But is Hamas a threat for like UN, these organizations that make aid for people? Because even them are supporting Hamas some way.
I mean, yes and no. Look, they're seeing a very unpleasant urban war, and they're calling it as they see it, which is very unpleasant. Now, there is a degree of inconsistency because we know from the UN's own website how much aid has gone into Gaza. Over 3,000 calories per person per day during the war. And yet, according to humanitarian agencies, that aid isn't reaching the people of Gaza. So we have to ask, why not? And the reason why not is because Hamas is seizing the aid and using it to control the population in Gaza. So the aid is going in, it's just not getting distributed.
Yeah, but,
and that's not Israel's fault.
Yeah, but cannot UN not report this and tell? Don't they know? Or they don't want to tell that story?
I think it's that they don't want to. Look, Israel has been condemned in the UN more times than any other country put together. More than Libya during the Gaddafi regime, more than Iraq under Saddam Hussein. You know, Israel is the #1 bad guy for the UN and has been for a very long time. And I think the UN is institutionally anti-Israeli. Look at the behaviour, the horrifying anti-Semitism of the UN Special Rapporteur. Mrs. Albanese has been appalling during this war, like nakedly anti-Semitic, and yet she just got reconfirmed in her job by the United Nations. So I think the United Nations has a serious Israel problem. I don't trust them, and I think they're not a credible reporter when it comes to this particular conflict.
Is it just this conflict, or is it the whole way you cannot trust UN anymore? So, well, some people say, put it down, erase it, start another organization.
Yeah, well, I can see the issue there. You know, if we look at who makes up the Human Rights Committee and the fact that countries like Iran get to sit on there, you know, they have no idea what equality means, and yet they get to sit on various committees that are supposedly overseeing this on behalf of the United Nations. We look at how international law has been weaponized by bad faith actors. South Africa know there isn't a genocide in Gaza. Every other complainant to that case knows, of course, there isn't a genocide. In no way does it come close to the intent, the dolus specialis of a genocide. It doesn't even have the numbers. Gaza's population has grown since the start of the war. They've had more births than people have died. So I believe, yes, the institution of the United Nations has real issues. And I spoke at the United Nations last December, and outside there is a statue of dismantled rockets with St. George slaying the dragon, made of rockets. And I was outraged because for the last year they've been supporting the side that fires the rockets, and that's really poor.
Tell me, are you a single one meaning this, or is it more people in your environment? I mean, in academia and maybe in the media too, that understand what you're talking about now, or are they afraid to say something, or they?
I think a lot of people are afraid to say, because if you put your head above the parapet, as I have, the abuse is astonishing. Deeply personal, deeply violent abuse will come your way, and it takes a bit of steel to ignore that. It's not easy. But I do have many, many military friends who've been to Israel. They've seen similar to what I've seen, and they all have come back agreeing that this is an army and an air force that is following the laws of war. And I just think it's worth repeating. The laws of war do not mean that civilians don't die. Unfortunately, it's tragically the opposite. But we either, if you take a position where you say no war should be fought ever, that's consistent, and I can respect it. I don't agree, but I respect it, and it's consistent. Well, if you're treating this war differently, though, I would ask people to question why they don't apply the standards that they're applying to this war to every other war, and maybe do some soul searching as to why that might be.
But why are you not afraid? You tell openly what you mean and what you have seen. Why do you do it?
Mainly for my Jewish friends, I think. They have suffered a huge rise in anti-Semitism as a result of the terrible reporting on the Gaza war. So I'm doing what I can to tell the truth. And in addition, I don't like bullies. And I think that in many ways on the international stage there is a bullying going on that I find deeply ugly. And so I feel that I have a duty to try and tell the truth as I see it, because I've been blessed with a voice and a platform to do so.
Do you meet some resistance? Is it difficult for you to tell this, or do you get some against you, or do most people understand you?
I think I make my case quite persuasively. Here's the thing, if somebody is deeply, deeply pro-Palestine, I'm never going to persuade them.
Okay.
I'm never going to persuade them. They're not my audience. The people I'm speaking to are the uncommitted. Those who just see a headline, they don't really have a strong opinion, it's just another war in the Middle East. They've got a mortgage to pay and children to feed. They have bigger things to worry about. They're the people that I would like to just bring to a narrative of fairness and look at both sides of the argument, because at the moment they're not being presented both sides. And I think that is a failure of the world's media, that they've not presented this case equally.